I hope you're having a good Sunday. I'm here in northern Israel, and I'm going to talk with you about the situation, the realpolitik of Israel, Palestine, Iran, Syria, Lebanon. I know I didn't put Iran in my title. Probably should have, right? Well, I didn't. What are they going to do? Right? These insane assets that we see moving. Assets known as countries, because they are countries. But they are financial assets as well. They are economic engines, some more powerful than others. Right? What is the U.S. going to do about the Middle East? What is the EU going to do about the Middle East? What is Russia going to do about the Middle East? And the answer is it all depends on who we're talking about and the context of those discussions, right? So, for example, what does the United States care about Israel or Palestine or Lebanon or Syria or Iran? Well, the real answer is they don't, except when it comes to their own interests. And their own interest is to make sure that Iran does not have a nuke. Even though, again, in my estimation, they probably do. They probably have nukes since a while. I know we've been hearing the words of the Israeli prime minister and the American president and European prime ministers and presidents for decades saying we can't let Iran get a nuke. At the same time, they've been saying Iran is just months away. Beginning 20 years ago, they're just a couple years away from having it, and then they're just months away from having it, and that went on for many years, and then they're just weeks away from having it, and then after that six-party agreement broke down during the last Trump administration because the U.S. pulled out of it, they're just days away from having it. Okay, so if they're just days away from having it, since like 7 years already, really think they don't have one? I'm sorry, but what? We know they have intercontinental ballistic missiles. They fired hundreds of them at Israel this year, or last year, 2024. Right? Iran fired, probably in total, 300 or 400 intercontinental ballistic missiles at Israel. If they had loaded up nuclear weapons on any of them, it would have been very bad. Right? Even if Iran had not actually struck Israel with a nuclear-armed ICBM, it would have been devastatingly bad for wherever they had been intercepted. But you got to remember, not all of them were intercepted, right? And that's one of the reasons Iran did what it did, was to test and to probe and test Israel's defense mechanisms to see how well they could shoot down those things. And you got to remember, if even one of those things lands in Israel, anywhere in the center of the country, I'm talking potentially millions of dead people, right? In an instant. And many more because of radioactive poisoning and everything else over the coming days, weeks, months, and years. So basically, one nuclear bomb would potentially wipe out all of Israel, which is why Israelis are very defensive about Iran having a nuke, and they don't want Iran to have a nuke. Understandable. But at the same time, the probability that a country like Iran does not have a nuke at this point, when they've been, hello, Astro Toilet, given Iran's penchant of having extremely high arsenal inventory, and maybe it's not the best in the world, but it's certainly not the worst. It is capable of doing significant damage, right? That's why Israel has a problem with the Hezbollah, because Hezbollah gets their weapons from Iran, and they're not the worst weapons in the world, I can tell you. They are, in fact, very lethal. They may not be as good at smart targeting as the US or Israel or whatever, but they have extremely high precision weapons relatively. They are able to target. They can target from many kilometers or miles away, a specific house or a building with extremely high accuracy. They do it all the time. Look at Metula. Look at the damage they've done in Metula, a city in northern Israel, right on the border between Lebanon and Syria, that Hezbollah has hit many times in the last year and a half since the war started in the last year and 4 months. And Israel has good reason to be concerned about Hezbollah's weapons that they get from Iran. And now you've seen Lebanon claiming that they stopped the transfer of funds that was en route to Hezbollah from Iran at Beirut airport. We'll see if that's true or not. If there is 6 watching, why is no one talking? I don't know. What do you mean talking? This is a live stream. I don't have other people talking in it. You mean chatting in here? I don't know. That's how it goes, I guess. Not everyone wants to say something like you. Feel free to ask questions. Let's be real. The problem in the Middle East, you can hate Israel all you want. Whatever. If that's your thing, that's your thing. Right? But let's face it. The problem in the Middle East is not Israel. And you can say, but Israel colonizes. No. The Arabs colonized the Middle East. The Arabs did that. The Arabs, for centuries, have colonized the Middle East. Right? The Arabs are from Arabia, right? Namely, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Yemen. Right? Those are Arabs. They live in Arabia. They live on the Arabian Peninsula. What do they have to do in here in the Levant, right? The west coast of the Middle East? What do they have to do with Israel or Lebanon or Palestine? Nothing. All they have to do with it is the fact that they conquered it and colonized it. That's it. That's the only thing that they have anything to do with it. There's no direct connection, people-wise, right? But over the centuries, they've colonized these lands. They have Islamicized these lands, right? They've made these lands Islamic. Not Israel, but, they did for a certain time, but not anymore. Right? Ever since Israel was reestablished in 1948, the land of Israel is predominantly Jewish. There are plenty of Muslims in Israel, though. About 20% at the time being. Something like 2 million Arabs live in Israel. Most of them are Muslim. Some of them, a small minority, about 10% or something, are Christian. Did you know that? I don't know if you knew that, but it's true. And the Muslims in Israel and the Arabs in Israel, whether they're Muslim, Christian, or anything else, have the same exact rights as every other Israeli, Jewish or otherwise. And in fact, Arabs have more rights in Israel than Jewish Israelis. In fact, anyone who's not a Jew has more rights in Israel than Jewish Israelis. Do you know why? Because Jewish Israelis have to serve in the military, unless they can prove they're pacifists or if they have some health condition that doesn't allow them to, or some other reason that they can't. Like, it's not easy to get out of military service in Israel. It's an army by conscription, meaning the government forces boys and girls, men and women, young men and women, once they hit 18, to be drafted into the army. They have to serve, whether they like it or not, whether they agree with military service or not, whether they love Israel or hate Israel. If they're Israeli, they have to serve, unless they're not Jewish. If they're not Jewish, they don't have to serve. In the case of the Arabs, it's because we don't want Arabs to be forced to potentially fight against other Arabs. If they're going to do that, they have to volunteer for that. And many do. Yes, thanks to you, I'm not the only one. Good luck. Dash. I don't know what dash means, but dash. If it's not, if they're not Arab, but they're not Jewish, they also can get exempted easier. Practically, they don't, they have to volunteer basically, because again, Israel does not want to put people, right, in harm's way. If doing that can cause a particular bad brouhaha politically. For example, if somebody becomes Israeli somehow, because let's say their parents, made Aliyah or whatever, and they grew up here, but they're not religious, they disavow themselves from Judaism, they're atheists or whatever, then you don't want them to be in harm's way and then have something happen where the news says, an atheist was killed in action in Israel, right? You want to make sure they volunteer for that, so there's no question about the authenticity of their service, their willingness to serve. They're volunteering for the risk, right? Oh, I volunteered for the risk because I wasn't Israeli at the time when I served. And yes, I served in the IDF. And I know plenty of you will hate me for that, and you can hate me for that all you want. That's part of life. I volunteered for the IDF way back in the day. I was also a very different person. These days, I would still volunteer because that's my core belief, is to serve the nation in some way, because it's a young nation that can use the hands that it has. And that's why I did that. Do I think that everybody has to serve? No, I don't think everyone has to serve. And not everybody does serve, right? Many people get exemptions, as is their right to apply for exemptions. And the government allocates exemptions in the cases that are deserving. There are plenty of deserving cases. Right? Like if somebody basically is not interested because they're a real pacifist, they don't have to. Anyway, why am I going on in the shtick about Israel and service? It's to point to you, Israel is not the problem in the Middle East. I don't know where your messages are rejected, but anyway. This country, all it wants to do is live in peace with its neighbors. That's all it wants to do. It really is. And, you can disagree with that all you want. It's a fact. It's provable. People will deny it because propaganda and because they don't know any better. And that's okay. Right? If you haven't studied this stuff your whole life, you don't know. If you haven't lived it for decades of your life, you don't know. It's okay. Right? And even if you have studied it, but you've studied it from a point of view of being brainwashed from one side or the other, frankly, because there are extremists among Israelis too. If you don't have a truly objective point of view, or as close to one as possible, and at least admit that you have a bias and are willing to look at the information and are willing to be objective about it when you inspect the information, right? Then you're never going to have an honest view of the situation. So right now, Israel and Lebanon are technically still at war. There's a ceasefire that has been doing exactly what I said it would do from before the time it was signed. I said it would be whittled away inch by inch, day by day. And Israel will be told, no, don't overreact. And Israel would say, okay, we're not going to overreact. We're still going to deal with what we have to deal with. And basically, it's going to whittle away the meaning and the significance of the ceasefire, because Hezbollah is not complying. They're not pulling out like they're supposed to. They're doing everything in contravention and in violation of the ceasefire. Israel's doing everything it's supposed to do. Oh, but Israel flies drones over Beirut. They're not supposed to do it. Yeah, they're doing that in response to violations by the Lebanese side. And the Lebanese side will say, well, no, we're doing that in response to violations by the Israeli side. Yeah, give me a break. Okay. which is the group of terrorists and which is the legitimate army. If you have to think about that, then you don't know. Okay? And if you don't know, you should listen. Power up, yes. And at the same time, what is Israel doing vis-a-vis its neighbors, right? Besides Lebanon. Well, in Syria, it's been revealed, as everybody already kind of knew, that Israel has struck deep into Syrian territory to knock out chemical weapons plants, arms munitions plants, Iranian munitions plants that were in Syria. Right? They sent in a special forces team some months ago, took out a few guards that were guarding the base, and then destroyed all the weapons manufacturing capability of that plant. Took a whole bunch of documents home. No Israelis were injured, and they came back home. And we know also that in the days following the fall of the Assad regime, what happened? Right, within 48 hours, Israel took out more than 80% of Syria's military capabilities. Long-range missile, middle-range missiles, short-range missiles, weapons manufacturing plants, chemical manufacturing plants that were used for weapons, so on and so forth, right? The Navy, everything. They just took it out. Why? Because why leave it in the hands of people that you don't know, that just last month, the month prior, and even on the day they took over Assad, were chanting Al-Qaeda chants and, having a grand old time celebrating by singing Al-Qaeda chants and Islamic State chants. Why would Israel leave that to be something that they could keep doing? It would be stupid, right? So they took out those assets, and there you have it, right? What about what's happening down on the southern front between Israel and Hamas, right? Well, Israel is still fighting Hamas. And guess what? Israel is fighting Hamas in Judea and Samaria too, what some people call the West Bank. And you know who else is fighting Hamas in Judea and Samaria? The Palestinian Authority. Even though the Palestinian Authority themselves pay for terrorists, they give them like a lifetime pension if they are martyred in an attack against Israel. They'll give their family a lifetime pension that they would have paid to the martyr, right? So if a martyr, if a person kills Jews and they were doing it on behalf of the Palestinian Authority or any of their armed wings or whatever, right? The PA gives them a pension, and literally, after they're gone, gives them a pension for life. And the more people they kill, the more money they get. Even if they don't kill anybody, if they just injure somebody, they get a pension for life if they die. And if they don't die, they still get a pension, sometimes for life. It depends on the gravity of the attack and all that. They have this whole scale. It's disgusting. Basically, how much money you get for how much Jewish blood you spill. It's just absolutely disgusting. And you know who pays for that? U.S. taxpayers pay for that. Okay, $400 million a year the U.S. gives the Palestinian Authority, which it then takes, and instead of using it for the money it's supposed to be allocated for, they allocate it for that purpose, then they take the other $400 million from other places, and they just fund it right into that. They funnel it right into that pension fund. It's absolutely disgusting. Okay? If you don't know, you don't know, but now you know. And then down on the southern side, by the way, also interesting to mention, a few months ago, you probably heard Israel shut down Al Jazeera in the West Bank. And a few months before that, Israel shut down Al Jazeera in Israel. It was all over the news for days. How dare the Jews block Al Jazeera? How dare the Israelis, the Jews, shut down Al Jazeera, an Arab news network from Qatar, which is just the propaganda wing of Hamas. Okay? The propaganda wing of terrorists. How dare those Jews shut down this important truth-telling news network? Truth-telling? No, they're not truth-telling. They're liars, and they're blatant propagandists for the side that supports terrorism. And you look at Al Jazeera News, you think, oh, that's a very sophisticated news network. It looks like CNN. It looks like Fox. Yeah, it looks like. But listen to what they're saying. Look at what they're saying. Hey, Michael. Hello. Hey. Right? Al Jazeera is just a propaganda arm of terrorists. Guess who shut them down last week in the West Bank? The Palestinian Authority. Let me say that again. The Palestinian Authority shut down Al Jazeera in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, last week. You know why? Because the Palestinian Authority said, yeah, Al Jazeera is spreading this information. The Palestinian Authority said Al Jazeera is spreading misinformation. Did you hear what I said? Because I'll say it again. The Palestinian Authority shut down Al Jazeera for spreading misinformation, for spreading lies that can trigger violent extremism. I bet you didn't hear that on the mainstream news. Or if you did, you saw it for like 5 seconds, and unless you're an avid news watcher, you have no idea. Because they didn't cover that all over the place. Yeah, they ran a story about it, of course, on Al Jazeera. They ran it all day. But it didn't make news in the rest of the world because nobody cares. Right? Arabs doing stupid things to Arabs. Nobody cares around the world. Oh, I'm back. Right? Arabs doing bad things to Arabs is not news. Right? Look at what happened in Syria. 600,000 dead since the so-called Arab Spring of 2011. Did you hear about it? Not a word, right? 600,000 dead in a pretty fast, short amount of time, by the way. Like, it didn't take them 15 years to do that. Right? They killed 500,000 of them within a few years. Were there protests demanding that the president of Syria be arrested for genocide? No. Were there even claims of genocide? No. Were there protests for the liberation of Syria? No. Nothing. Because they don't care. Sudan. Look how many people died there. Hundreds of thousands of people. Between the Christian and the Muslim groups in Sudan fighting. Why? Why did nobody care about that? Because nobody cares, right? Because they're not Jews, right? Jews are news. Unfortunately, it's pros and cons of that saying. Right? The pro is great, wonderful. We can get attention sometimes if we need it. But the unfortunate side is we need it in the first place because of the horrible mistreatment that we suffered over the eons. And it's just absolutely disgusting, right? So what is the U.S. going to do? What is the EU going to do? The U.S. and the EU, they don't like Israel. They hate Israel, right? I mean, yes, I know some people in the U.S. are very fond of Israel. I understand that. Tens of millions of people, not just Jews, right? Evangelicals and lots of other people who are non-denomination. Reasonable, right-minded, thinking people, right? But policy-wise, administration-wise, they don't like their country. The administration in the White House, as much as it's been supportive of Israel, and it has been, also doesn't like Israel. It's a fact. There's always a tension between Israel and America. If America truly liked Israel, it would let Israel win the wars. But it doesn't let Israel win the wars. Decisively, I mean. Because decisively, Israel wins kinetically, there is no question about it. But then politically, they're prevented from actually closing the deal and getting an outright victory and forcing the enemy to surrender. It's just a fact. They're not allowed to win. Why? Because if they did, it would cause a political imbalance that would throw the major powers of the world a little bit out of power in the Middle East. And they don't want that. So that's what's going to happen. We're going to continue seeing what we're seeing. And I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.